virtue of the power vested in me, I hereby constitute this assembly as a legal congregation of the University of Pretoria. During this assembly, degrees with all the associated rights and privileges will be conferred on the candidates whose names appear in the program. Please take a seat. Ladies and gentlemen, we request you to join us in silent prayer or meditation to give thanks for the achievements of our students. Thank you. Welcome and good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. This is our spring graduation ceremony for the Faculty of Natural Sciences, Natural and Agricultural Sciences. And I'm sure we have a beautiful day today, marginally different from what it was yesterday. And it is really looking like a spring day. I met a granny outside here as I was walking in from the Eastern Cape who was complaining how hot it is in Pretoria. And I said, well, welcome to our world, old lady. We were happy to have you here, like many others that are here, but it is indeed a beautiful day. It is a great pleasure for me to officiate at this auspicious event where we'll be conferring 202 degrees to our graduates. And this will include 48 doctorates, 78 master's degrees, and 19 honors degrees. The Faculty of Natural and Agricultural Sciences continues to play a prominent role under the leadership of Professor John Libuma. And we have this prominent role, of course, and as demonstrated in our doctoral outputs today and other postgraduate qualifications. This year's yield is a continuation of our faculty's trend in outstanding performance at the postgraduate level and is a key contributor to making the University of Pretoria a leading higher education institution in Africa. And on behalf of all of us here present, I congratulate each and every one of you on this remarkable achievement. It is indeed your perseverance, your self-discipline and self-control, and of course self-belief that has now paid off with this kind of achievement that we see for you to finish these qualifications. You have indeed, as we say in Pretoria, the finishing line is yours. Every good that is worth possessing, I beg your pardon, must be paid for in strokes of daily effort. Every good that is worth possessing must be paid for in strokes of daily effort. These are the words of William James, a 20th century American philosopher and physician. And that is indeed what you have done. And the degree you receive today will certainly be worth it. In celebrating your achievement, it is certainly also fitting to give recognition to all those who have supported you during your studies. Whether it was academically, financially, or emotionally, or other kinds of support. please join me in giving a round of applause to the supervisors, lecturers, spouses, family, friends, sponsors, and significant others who have indeed played this role for you to receive these qualifications today. May we give them a round of applause, please. Your support is sincerely appreciated. And in our striving towards an ambitious 2025 strategic plan, the University of Pretoria aims to be recognized locally, on the continent and internationally for its quality, relevance, and impact, and also for developing people, creating knowledge and making a difference locally and globally, and particularly in the much feared natural sciences. With its 17 departments, the faculty is one of the largest and most diverse of its kind in South Africa. It offers some of the most relevant and specialized undergraduate programs in biological, mathematical, physical, as well as agricultural and food sciences. And it further contributes substantially to the building of research and teaching capacity in South Africa, and currently hosts 42% of the NRF-rated researchers at the University of Pretoria, 42%. It generates a large proportion of the university's accredited journal publication units, and this is testament to the quality and impact of the research output, and notably the number of postgraduates that will be passing the stage this afternoon. And inside the faculty, the broad base of undergraduate programs lays in the basis for a strong postgraduate program and a prominent research profile. The faculty's contribution to the undergraduate training of students in health sciences, veterinary sciences, engineering, as well as education should not be underestimated. In other words, you cannot produce veterinarians, you cannot produce health practitioners, you cannot produce educationists, engineers, without you passing through this faculty. It is truly central in the work that it does. This is important as the hopes for the future of our country and its material intellectual enrichment in all fields rely strongly on development of science and technology. Across the globe, universities have always played a critical role in producing new knowledge and in growing intellectual capital. While academic staff work on critical issues within their areas of expertise, the next generation of students are educated with methods needed to produce new knowledge. At the next level, university researchers play a role in setting in motion the industrial revolutions that have made the world what it is today. In the 1700s, research into mechanization, water, and steam lay at the heart of transition to the new manufacturing processes that marked the first industrial revolution of the 18th century. And economics were changed forever. And the rapid industrialization of the 19th century, known as the Second Industrial Revolution, was preceded by scientific developments in terms of mass production, electricity, the birth of assembly lines, and so forth. We have never looked back, except perhaps to research the impact of the revolutionary changes that have gone before, and notably climate change or global warming. Another century later, the third industrial revolution saw the dawn of the computer, the internet, and automation. None of this would have been possible without the new knowledge generated in the academic environment. The science and intellectual capital behind these revolutions have transformed our lives today. And universities, including this university, have a massive role to play in the current fourth industrial revolution. And I believe that our contribution lies in research on key technologies such as artificial intelligence, robotics, biotechnology, and the realm of cyberspace. The development of new technology and applied science that lay the foundation for new products in the market, and mapping the impact and consequences of the unintended, what we call unintended consequences for people and economies and the world politics. What we do today determines the future of the world we live in. Now, dear graduates, it is my sincere hope that your UP qualification and a general formative education as a techie, both inside and outside the lecture rooms, will continue to empower you even further to play a constructive role in society. May you rise out above the rest in your fields of specialization, but also in various roles in your circles of influence and your respective professional and personal communities. I'm confident that you will be able to walk out here today with the core values of the university firmly instilled in you, and that you will seek to continue your learning experiences, because the world is really demanding these kinds of skills. I wish to also further hope that the life lessons you have learned during your time here at the university have formed you as a well-rounded individual and make you mindful of your fellow men and women wherever you go. And the author I mentioned earlier, William James, I wish to quote a little bit what he says here in a few sentences. It's pretty simple, but when big people make quotations, even when they not say much, we quote them. He says, 3 things in human life are important. The first is to be kind. And the second is to be kind. And the third is to be kind. It's still the same thing. I don't know why he said it's 3. But anyway, I'm saying, don't let your academic achievements turn you into an arrogant scientist. Show your humility and be a role model to generations behind you, especially because the sciences are still, feared by some. Just simplify it for people. And in conclusion, I invite you to join the community of proud tech alumni, to be kind, and actively plow back to university with humility. In so doing, I encourage you to be worthy ambassadors of our illustrious university. All that remains is for me to wish you well as you start a new chapter in your life, and I wish you all the best. And I hope that those of you who will continue with further studies, your PhDs, your honors and masters and so forth, or postdoc fellows, will become part of this family. And to Professor Lubuma and the team, we thank you heartily for the work that you've been doing over time. We do not take it for granted. We know how hard it is for people at the coalface to produce what you have produced today. Sometimes we appear impossible, but we know that you will achieve what you have achieved today. And I thank you very much. I will now request the Dean and supervisors to introduce to me the candidates present here.
The supervisors will now introduce the doctoral candidates.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Matthew Emmanuel Okello Ajuka, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Characterization of Pathogenic E. coli Associated with Food and Irrigation Water in South Africa. In his thesis, the promovendo studied human pathogenic gastrointestinal bacteria associated with diarrheal disease, common among infants and adults with weakened immunity. Enteroaggregative E. coli was identified as potentially the leading cause of foodborne illness. He also developed a rapid molecular method for the identification of antibiotic-resistant and disease-causing E. coli. This provides a viable option for routine monitoring in food production, environmental, and clinical settings. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you confer the degree on the candidate.
The degree, Doctor of Philosophy, with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidates.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Gabriel Bidemi Akani, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Alkaline Fermentation of Bambara Groundnut as Dawa-Dawa-like African Food Condiment, prepared under my supervision and with Professor Riet de Kock as co-supervisor. The promovendus characterized the diversity and functionality of bacillus species capable of alkaline fermentation of the Bambara groundnut, which is an underutilized African legume. The production of dawa-dawa-like condiments from Bambara groundnut using these bacillus starter cultures is beneficial in terms of product quality and flavor consistency in the small to medium food scale industry in Africa. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Alwashan Peter Bamidele, who has complied with the requirement for the degree Philosophia Doctor with a thesis title Encapsulation, In Vitro Release and Storage Stability of Encapsulated Ascorbyl Palmitate with Normal and High Amylose Maize Starch by Pasting and Spray Drying, prepared under my supervision and with Professor K.G. Dodu as co-supervisor. In his thesis, the promovendus successfully encapsulated ascorbyl palmitate with maize starches. The encapsulated ascorbyl palmitate was more stable in simulated stomach condition and storage under light condition compared to free ascorbyl palmitate. The promovendus has shown that only part of encapsulated ascorbyl palmitate is released during in vitro digestion, suggesting that some will be fermented in the large intestine. The release of ascorbyl palmitate had good in vitro antioxidant activity. This thesis provides more insight into the potential of encapsulation of ascorbyl palmitate through the use of green chemistry as well as clean label nutraceuticals for increased shelf life and target delivery. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy for all its associate rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Mariam Mojisola Bello Aginosho, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Biodegradation of Polycyclic Aromatic Hydrocarbons in Contaminated Soils using a tripartite association of ectomycorrhizal fungi, pine plant, and their rhizosphere bacteria, prepared under my supervision and with Professor Rashid Adeleke as co-supervisor. In her thesis, the promovenda investigated a three-party association of pine plant, ectomycorrhizal fungi, and rhizosphere bacteria for the bioremediation of soil polluted with polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs. Bacteria with different PAH degradation as well as soil fertility enhancing abilities were isolated. One of the isolates' whole genome, Pseudomonas strain 10-1b, was sequenced, assembled, and annotated. The genome revealed several genes involved in PAH degradation and others responsible for soil fertility enhancement. The ectomycorrhizal fungi manifested mycorrhizal relationships with Pinus patula, and they were compatible with the bacterial isolates. The mutual relationship exhibited by these organisms is of great ecosystem significance. The ectomycorrhizal fungi and Pinus patula also tolerated the three PAHs, namely naphthalene, phenanthrene, and fluoranthene at different concentrations. The alpha subunit of the PAH ring hydroxylating gene known to initiate degradation of PAH ring structure was abundantly expressed. This study represents a novel effort to evaluate the ectomycorrhizosphere of Pinus patula for soil PAH degradation. It substantially contributes to improving strategies for the reclamation of PAH polluted sites, which will make for the improved overall health of the environment, as well as an increase in agricultural production. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Patricia Carmichael, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Botrytis cinerea, Presence and Microbiomes of Table Grapes during Production and Post-Harvest Storage, prepared under my and Dr. Siam's co-supervision. In her thesis, the promovenda focused on microbiomes of crimson seedless table grapes at different development stages, with special emphasis on Botrytis cinerea, an important post-harvest pathogen. The findings of the study revealed that microbiome succession in table grapes is influenced by development stages and agroecological sites. Moreover, the microbial diversity differs between vine positions in the vineyard. The study provided novel insight into the diversity and succession of fungal communities on the berry as it develops from full bloom to maturity. Since information is significant in developing a sustainable, healthy microbiome-driven system, The prevalence of botrytis cinerea during development was successfully monitored on asymptomatic grape samples using droplet digital polymerase chain reaction, a novel detection tool. Such information is also significant for industry with regard to the application of timely control measures, disease prediction modeling, planning for harvest dates, and making informed decisions about market destinations, hence reducing post-harvest decay. Furthermore, the effect of the production, season, and storage conditions on the post-harvest quality of table grapes were studied with respect to post-harvest fruit quality and storability. The study supports the importance of pre-harvest weather conditions as well as temperature fluctuations during post-harvest handling. Less humid conditions during pre-harvest and unbroken cold chain post-harvest storage are critical to ensure minimum fruit decay and best quality at the market end. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree, Doctor of Philosophy, with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Alanesi Chakwe, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Identification and Resistance Profiles of Cladobotrium Species Pathogenic on Agaricus bispaloris, prepared under my supervision with Dr. van der Linde as external co-supervisor. In her thesis, the promovanda studied the level of fungicide resistance of Cladobotrium species associated with mushroom cultivation and focused on registered fungicides in the mushroom industry. In her thesis, the promovanda indicated the possible sources of fungicide resistance and documented the presence of less sensitive species in the mushroom industry. A further aspect of her study was to identify and classify Cladobotrium species according to their importance in relation to aggression and to better understand the pathogen in terms of different species presence and the cause of disease. Also to focus on species aggression, adaptation to fungicide use, and for the prospective development of more effective control methods. She found an effective way of identifying Cladobotrium using different standard and molecular methods. The technology platform developed in her thesis can be used to rapidly identify different species in the industry. She further stressed the importance of monitoring fungicide resistance and revealed the natural occurring isolates that's more sensitive to test fungicides present in the mushroom growing industry. Mr. Vice President, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Melanie Kitray, who has complied with the requirements of the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Improvement of the Foot-and-Mouth Disease Vaccines and Diagnostics Through Structural Design, prepared under my supervision. In her thesis, the promovendum developed improved foot-and-mouth disease diagnostic assays in two ways. One, the validation of a serological test to differentiate vaccinated from infected animals, DIVA, in Southern Africa. And two, using foot-and-mouth disease virus-specific recombinant monoclonal antibodies to detect foot-and-mouth disease virus in an enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, or ELISA. The SAT-specific DIVA assay was successfully developed using a bacterially expressed truncated non-structural protein of the virus and a detecting monoclonal antibody, where validation studies confirmed sensitivity and specificity of the ELISA. SAT1 and SAT3 single-chain variable fragments of antibodies were obtained from a Nkuku phage display chicken antibody library and were used to detect and antigenically profile different SAT1 and SAT3 foot-and-mouth disease viruses. Additionally, using reverse genetics technology, chimera vaccine master seed viruses were developed with enhanced growth in culture cells and improvement in foot-and-mouth disease vaccine antigen yield. The improved viruses harbor positive charged amino acid residue substitutions that were symmetrically arranged on the virion surface and were shown to enter cells via alternative cell receptors, heparin sulfate. The proof of concept was achieved with 2 mutant viruses which showed enhanced adaptation to cell culture and broadened host-cell interaction. These results can be used for the rapid production of structurally improved master seed foot-and-mouth disease virus for vaccine production purposes. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Andrei Kutzer, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophiae Doctor with a thesis entitled The Epidemiology of Rabies in Selected Sub-Saharan Countries, prepared under my supervision, and with Professor V.W. Marcotter as co-supervisor. In his thesis, the promovendus reported the generation of accurate rabies surveillance data in specific sub-Saharan regions. Those were South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal, Zimbabwe's Harare province, also Tanzania, Lesotho, and Mozambique. He applied a gold standard assay and a new assay, the direct rapid immunohistochemical test, to all suspect rabies samples in these territories in order to improve the quality and the quantity of surveillance data. So the work bolstered the epidemiological understanding of rabies in these countries, and has also found that the new test demonstrated a high diagnostic efficacy, but also maintained this efficacy under conditions of suboptimal storage, collection, and transportation. Molecular epidemiological analysis was then used to increase the resolution of the surveillance data through the identification of unique endemic rabies virus cycles and multiple instances of trans-border transmission of this virus. So in this way, he could elucidate the transmission patterns of rabies in the target countries and exposed the significant risk that uncontrolled movement of people and animals across political and geographical borders pose to disease elimination programs and to overall disease control in the region in general. So based on the data that he has generated, the implementation of cost-effective targeted control initiative inside and along the borders of these countries would be a significant strategic achievement. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree, Doctor of Philosophy, with all associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Pranitha Davalal, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Reducing Fumonisn Exposure in African Fermented Maize-Based Foods with Lactic Acid Bacteria, prepared under my supervision and with Professor Sanza and Dr. Catherine Brabet as co-supervisors. The promovenda investigated the ability of dominant probiotic lactic acid bacteria strains, namely Lactobacillus plantarum and Lactobacillus delbrueckii and Pediococcus pentusosius, isolated from Ogi and Mahewu, to visually bind the fumonisins B1 and B2 by use of confocal laser scanning microscopy. This is probably the first study to visualize the interaction between lactic acid bacteria and fumonisins. The promovenda also investigated and established binding mechanisms and stable binding interactions. The effect of the lactic acid bacteria strains on reducing the toxicity of fumonisins to HepG2 cells in vitro was also investigated, and it can now be suggested that these lactic acid bacteria strains could be used for their HEPA2 protective effect in the liver against fumonisins. These lactic acid bacteria strains, isolated from African traditional fermented foods, can be used as detoxifying agents in reducing the toxicity of fumonisins B1 and B2. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
Doctor of Philosophy, with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Dion de Jager, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophiae Doctor with a thesis titled Conservation and Management Genomics of African Buffalo from Southern Africa, prepared under my supervision and with Dr. Cindy Harper as co-supervisor. In his thesis, the promovenda studied the population genetics and genomics of African Cape buffalo in South Africa and Namibia. He compared the genetic diversity of disease-free buffalo populations on private game farms and in formerly protected areas. He developed a software program to identify unrelated individuals from molecular marker data, a program that now has broad applicability. He generated low-coverage whole genome sequences of 40 buffalo from 4 protected areas. These data were used to investigate the demographic history of each population, as well as genome-wide diversity and inbreeding levels of individual buffalo, and to identify genomic areas under selection in these populations. The results of this research showed equivalent high genetic diversity in most of the populations. However, the population in Addo Elephant National Park must be supplemented with other disease-free buffalo to increase the genetic diversity in this population. Collectively, the results from this research provide a new perspective on the evolutionary forces that have shaped the genetic diversity of present-day Southern African Cape buffalo populations and will facilitate both present and future efforts in the conservation of this charismatic species. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree, Doctor of Philosophy, with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Natrisha Devnarain, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Elucidation of Drought Tolerance Mechanisms in South African Sorghum Big Colour Land Races, prepared under the supervision of Dr. Bridget Crampton and with Dr. Marietta Kennedy and myself as co-supervisors. In her thesis, the promovenda conducted physiological, transcriptomic, and metabolite profiling investigations in previously uncharacterized South African sorghum land races. Sorghum land races are highly drought-tolerant grain crops and are adapted to the local climate of South Africa. Significant differential expression of nearly 2,000 transcripts, including 264 transcripts with currently unknown functions, were altered in response to water deficit and rewatering. Gene ontology analysis identified significant enrichment of 26 transcripts involved in the response to the abiotic stimulus category during severe stress in one land race. Importantly, nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy detection of beta-alanine betaine supports the microarray and quantitative real-time PCR findings, thereby validating a role for beta-alanine betaine biosynthesis in sorghum drought tolerance. Results from the physiological investigation were published in the South African Journal of Botany, and the publication was recognized as overall winner, paper published in Scientific Journals category at the 2016 Gauteng Department of Agriculture and Rural Development Research Symposium. This research was presented at the International Interdrought Conferences in Australia in 2013 and India in 2017. The candidate received the Best Poster Award at the latter conference. Overall, this study has yielded significant insights into drought tolerance mechanisms activated in South African sorghum land races. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
Degree, Doctor of Philosophy, with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Marika Geldenhuys, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Viral Discovery in South African Insectivorous Bats Using Metagenomic Strategies, prepared under my supervision and the co-supervision of Dr. Jacqueline Weyer. She studied the development and the implementation of tools for conducting multi-pathogen viral surveillance within bat hosts. Bats have been identified as a source of zoonotic viruses that has caused large human outbreaks. She developed expertise in a field for which there was limited local knowledge, namely viral metagenomics, as well as suitable bioinformatics analysis pipelines. She also developed primary cell lines that can now be used to isolate viruses in the laboratory. Viral metagenomics identified sequence data from 10 viral families, 8 of which constitute the first detection of these viruses from insectivorous bats in southern Africa. From the data, she identified a novel species of cycloviruses, as well as the complete coding genome of Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus that was isolated from the Neuromycia gastrointestinal virome. The virus MERS has caused large human outbreaks in the past few years, and it is important to investigate their emergence.
The study of these viruses enables greater awareness of viral agents circulating in wildlife populations and allow us to prepare better for future outbreaks. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree, Doctor of Philosophy, with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Mr. Callisto Justino Guambe, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophia Doctor with a thesis entitled Stochastic Optimal Portfolios and Life Insurance Problems in a Levy Market. In his thesis, the promovendus focused on the theoretical aspects of the stochastic optimal portfolio and its application to insurance and equity markets under jump diffusion processes. He first considered a stochastic volatility model, which was solved using two techniques, the Martingale approach and the maximum principle. Secondly, the promovendus considered the presence of inflation-linked assets, which normally help the investors manage the inflation risks that in general are not completely observable. Using the theory of quadratic exponential backward stochastic differential equations, BSDEs, he successfully obtained the optimal strategy for exponential and power utility functions. Finally, a risk-based optimal investment problem of an insurer in a regime switching jump diffusion model with noisy memory was considered. Using model uncertainty modeling, he formulated the investment problem as a zero-sum stochastic differential delay game between the insurer and the market, with convex risk measure of terminal surplus and Brownian delay surplus, solved by backward stochastic differential equation techniques. This type of risk measures allow that a diversification of investments does not increase the risk. This work makes a substantial contribution on the mathematical modeling of jump diffusion processes and market incompleteness with respect to the life insurance, which is still at an infant stage of development. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Sasha Hoffman, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophied Doctor with a thesis entitled Genetic Correlates, the Mating System, Population Structure and Personality of the Eastern Rocksingies, Elephantulus maiurus. In her thesis, before I go on, this degree was undertaken by the supervisor, Heike Luteman, and co-supervised by Professor Bettine Janssen van Vieren and myself. In her thesis, the promovenda focused on a very interesting topic. She married two very basic disciplines, that being molecular ecology and behavioral ecology, to unravel a very interesting question. That being, are elephant shrews truly monogamous? unlike many mammals, small mammals in particular, which show promiscuous activity and don't care who the hell they mate with, the elephant shrew seems to show a very strict monogamous behavior. Her research has shown many of firsts. She was the first to use the topic of personality to investigate the impact of this behavior on the population dynamics of an entire group of small mammals. Previously, personality has been considered background noise or individual variation in animal activity, but personality has been found now to be a very, very important and crucial target for looking at the reproduction and indeed other aspects of survival in an animal. Her work is the first to comprehensively investigate dispersal patterns, which require a huge amount of work in a very energetic and very fast mammal. And finally, she also developed, or was the first to develop, a microsatellite library consisting of a number of primers to investigate the reproductive biology and the population biology of a number of populations in the northern part of South Africa, with also validation of cross-amplification with other Sengi populations. Her study is involved in an incredible amount of work, and she's unraveled some very, very interesting findings. Her multidisciplinary approach has highlighted that you cannot rely on behavior alone, but you require the genetic input of animals as well. And we all know this about multiple paternity in animals. This is also found in humans, as what most people know. You can't have the behavior, you need the genetics behind it as well. Furthermore, her work has shown that most of the exploratory animals, or the bolder animals, actually had much larger home ranges, whereas those of the shyer animals disperse and go from great distances from their natal range. So, in a nutshell, her work using behavioral ecology and mimicry ecology has shown that you can't rely only on behavior to explain genetic population structure, you need the two. And on a personal note, the candidate has produced one paper already, which is published, and she is in the process of producing 3 further publications, all which will be assigned to top peer-reviewed journals. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate with all its rights and privileges.
I confer the degree of Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Nadia Alcina Ibrahima, who has complied with all the requirements for the degree of Philosopher Doctor with a thesis titled Water Use of Deciduous and Evergreen Nut Tree Crops, a case study using pecans and macadamias, prepared under my supervision and with Professors Annandale and Steyn as co-supervisors. In her thesis, the Provender investigated the regulation of crop water use in pecan and macadamia trees in order to identify the most suitable modelling approaches to estimate water use of these crops. This is important for improved irrigation scheduling and irrigation water management of orchards growing under a range of climates and management practices. The study provides novel insight into the regulation of transpiration of pecans and macadamias as affected by changes in environmental conditions and proposes unique modelling approaches to accurately estimate water use. In both crops, transpiration was well coupled to the atmosphere, but was primarily atmospheric evaporative demand limited in pecans and water supply limited in macadamias. These distinct crop water use patterns are likely related to their varying growth habits, which are typically adaptations to the environments in which they evolved. Reliable daily predictions of transpiration and soil evaporation were obtained with canopy conductance and dual crop coefficient models, while simple single crop coefficient modelling approaches were sufficient to predict monthly crop evapotranspiration. Daily models can be used by growers to improve the irrigation scheduling and orchard productivity, whilst monthly predictions can assist in the efficient management of available water resources and irrigation planning, which is particularly important in water-scarce countries. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Siddiqui Delphin Condola, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Alternaria Blight of Sweet Potato in South Africa and Development of an Integrated Disease Management Strategy, prepared under my supervision and with Professor Jackie van der Wals and Dr. Maria Truter as co-supervisors. In his thesis, the promovendus readdressed the causal agents of Alternaria blight on sweet potato in South Africa, studied factors influencing the development of the disease caused by Alternaria baticola, screened sweet potato varieties or breeding lines for their tolerance to the disease, and assessed various chemicals for the control of Alternaria blight with the fundamental goal of developing an integrated disease management strategy. Using sequences from 5 gene regions, he found that Alternaria species were delineated into 4 defined clades. He used A. baticola in his research as it was the most frequently isolated in Gauteng. In the epidemiological studies, he evaluated the effects of different parameters on the disease development and found that high humidity for 48 hours, temperature of 25 to 25 degrees Celsius, and high inoculum concentrations increased disease intensity. He screened sweet potato varieties or breeding lines and determined the tolerance. Selected fungicides were assessed for their efficacy against Alternaria blight under field conditions, and he found 2 fungicides that were very efficient. A proposed integrated disease management includes planting disease-free cuttings of tolerant varieties on raised beds and fields with no history of Alternaria blight. Practices that reduce humidity and soil wetness, humidity in the soil and wetness on the leaves are encouraged. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce you to Afeni Nongi Milupu Kasimoni, who has complied with the requirements of the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Sustainability of Wildlife Resources in Zambia, an analysis of community participation and devolution of authority from central government to community resource boards in Mamba and Lupandi game management areas. Prepared under my supervision with Prof. Willem Ferguson as co-supervisor. In her thesis, the promovenda conducted a mixed-view research study into the sustainable use of wildlife resources in Zambia. She assessed the devolution of authority from central government to the local communities and local community participation in the 2 game management areas. She established that the factors contributing to the unsustainable use of natural resources included a low level of participation by local communities living in the areas. She found that the local communities were not involved in decision-making processes regarding the management of wildlife resources, despite the law stating that they should. The partial devolution of authority over wildlife resources from the government to local communities and unequal distribution of the wildlife resources benefits were other factors that contributed to the unsustainable utilization of wildlife. Promovenda proposed the provision of meaningful decision-making powers and benefit for the utilization and management of wildlife resources to the local communities. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce you to Mashlane Godfrey Khatle, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Alternaria Blight of Sunflower Caused by Alternaria alternata and its Control in South Africa, prepared under my supervision and with Professor Bradley Flett and Dr. Mariette Truter as co-supervisors. In his thesis, the promovendus disproved the notion that Alternaria alternata is a mere saprotroph surviving on sunflower debris, but is the primary cause of Alternaria leaf blight of sunflower. Alternaria leaf blight reduces the growth and yield of sunflower by initiating premature defoliation and a decline in the photosynthetic area of the plant. Using traditional and novel seed health testing techniques, the candidate proved that Alternaria alternata is seed transmissible and is able to infect up to 82% of a sunflower seed batch, therefore serving as a source of inoculum in subsequent growing seasons. As a result, Alternaria leaf blight was found to be prevalent throughout the major sunflower growing areas of South Africa. In an attempt to alleviate widespread effect of Alternaria leaf blight, he evaluated the efficacy of seed treatments and spray programs and found that strobilurin-based fungicides reduced Alternaria leaf blight significantly. The study supports the concept that climate change may contribute to changes in crop diseases, as Alternaria helianthe was previously more prevalent, but is now absent due to hotter and wetter conditions that favor Alternaria alternata. The study also indicates that misidentified Alternaria species may indirectly result in disease epidemics, and that developing new control methods or adapted techniques is essential in order to avoid serious crop losses. The findings of this research are currently being implemented by sunflower producers in South Africa. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Esther Andrew Masumba, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophiae Doctor with a thesis titled Mapping of QTL Associated with Resistance to Cassava Brown Streak and Mosaic Diseases in Cassava Farmer Varieties from Tanzania, prepared under my supervision and with Professor Alexander Myberg and Dr. Morak Ferguson as co-supervisors. In her thesis, the promovendus studied the genetics of resistance to these two diseases. She constructed linkage maps based on the cassava genome and used phenotypic data to discover quantitative trait loci that explain variation in resistance. Analysis of the DNA sequences underlying these quantitative trait loci further revealed potential resistance genes, while quantification of virus loads under field conditions showed no statistically supported correlation with disease symptoms. Therefore, the resistance quantitative trait loci provide a target for marker-assisted breeding of cassava against cassava brown streak disease and cassava mosaic disease. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Tolele Osmond Nyamenzeli Bolonyeni, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Characterization of Genetic Variability in the Cyrex Amylosterium deledenus symbiosis, prepared under my supervision and with Professor Jaco Greef, Professor Brenda Wingfield, and Professor Michael Wingfield as co-supervisors. In his thesis, the promovendus studied the invasive Cyrex noctulio wasp and its associated Amylosterium areolatum fungus that forms a pest complex that has caused significant damage to the pine plantations across the southern hemisphere. In particular, he examined the role of diversity in the management of Cyrex noctulio by the biological control nematode Deledenus saurosedicula. He characterized the genetic variation of populations of these organisms, as well as the variation in traits that have relevance to its use in biological control programs. The data revealed significant variation in the ability of the nematode to convert to the infective form, even in populations that have little genetic variation at microsatellite loci. Laboratory rearing did not have an effect on the ability of the nematode to parasitize the wasp, but the efficacy of this process was significantly affected by different Amylosterium areolatum strains. The latter finding is significant as the project revealed at least 9 strains of this fungus in South Africa using microsatellites that he developed from the genome of the fungus. The complete mitochondrial genomes of the wasp and the fungus were also characterized, which is the first for their respective families, and these were used to develop further markers for population genetic studies. The thesis illustrated that an understanding of variation in the Cyrex Amylosterium deledenus symbiosis is important for an effective and locally tailored biological control program. In general, it demonstrates that population genetic tools need to be an integral part of a comprehensive plantation forest pest management strategy, especially when biological control systems are used. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Daniel Moraka Mutiang, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophiae Doctor with a thesis titled Factors Influencing Offtake Rates of Smallholder Cattle Farming in the Northwest Province of South Africa, prepared under my supervision. In his thesis, the promovendus studied offtake patterns of cattle producers and identified several constraints which need to be addressed in order to improve herd productivity and offtake rates. Results showed that herd size had the most influence on cattle offtake, followed by reliance on income from cattle, as well as low calving rates. Low calving rates suppressed offtake and threatened the sustainability of smallholder cattle production systems. This research makes a substantial contribution to the intricate relationship between the farm or household dynamics and cattle offtake. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
Confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Kapwe Hanadi Mabunga, who complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophiae Doctor with a thesis titled Drivers of Smallholder Farmers Crop Production with special focus on maize in Choma District. Prepared under the supervision of Professor Willem Ferguson and with Dr. Joe Stevens and myself as co-supervisors. The Promovendus conducted multi-perspective research of factors affecting the production of maize and other crops among smallholder farmers in Zambia. With agricultural governance strategies in Zambia as well as donor aid concentrated on combating the effects of climate change on agriculture, his study established that economic factors such as limited access to fertilizer and seed, the late delivery of inputs, delayed payments by the Food Reserve Agency for maize, and a lack of markets affected maize productivity on smallholder farms more than climatic factors itself. The study also showed how diversified livelihoods among smallholder farmers can result in relatively stable household economies. His research used a wide variety of statistical tools and focused on methods of sustainably increasing food sufficiency among smallholder farmers in Zambia. A proposed improved agricultural governance framework for sustaining smallholder agriculture was developed, showing how smallholder food sufficiency can be improved with improved agricultural governance systems. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Silence Mungumezulu, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophia Doctor with a thesis titled Development of an Integrated Timing System for the HRO Lunar Laser Ranging Station, prepared under my supervision and with Dr. Joel Buttai as co-supervisor. In his thesis, the Promovendus investigated the factors which would affect the accuracy and stability of the timing subsystem for the new Lunar Laser Ranging Station under development at the Hartebeespoort Radio Astronomy Observatory. The technique of lunar laser ranging involves ranging to the moon by transmitting short laser pulses about 30 centimeter in length to the retroreflectors located on the surface of the moon. The study included determination and evaluation of the rubidium oscillator error budget, the development of scripts for analysis of the oscillator drift and aging characteristics, as well as the analysis of possible GPS multipath effects. The stability of the reference clock forms the basis of ensuring that the photon time of flight is measured accurately and precisely. This requires picosecond accuracy, which is 1/millionth of a second, to minimize systematic errors in measurement. The result of this work include an integrated timing subsystem for the system, characterization of multipath effects due to GPS antenna placement, and how to mitigate multipath-induced errors, reference oscillator behavior and aging characteristics, as well as statistical tools for evaluating clock behavior. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Tanzal Oberholster, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophiae Doctor with a thesis titled Root-Associated Microorganisms of Economically Important Crops, prepared under the supervision of Dr. Angel Valverde Portal and Professor Don Cowan as co-supervisor. In her thesis, the promovenda investigated the rhizosphere microbial communities of sorghum sunflower, maize monocropping, potato maize, and soybean maize rotations. Analyses of the sorghum microbiome indicated that specific bacterial taxa were involved in both essential and specialized metabolic functions. The potential use of sorghum, a native crop, as a drought-tolerant phytoremediation system was highlighted. The use of maize during crop rotation resulted in homogenization of soil microbial communities, especially for bacteria. The promovenda recommended that crop selection and the order in which crops are rotated should be investigated with regards to changes in soil microbial communities and the potential impact on crop yield. Her findings contribute towards the understanding of how soil microbial communities respond to changes induced by crop rotation. This knowledge is valuable for the development of crop productivity and provides management tools for use in sustainable agriculture. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Faith Ukamaga Uchai EJ, who has complied with the requirements for the degree of philosophy doctor with a thesis titled Synthesis and Characterization of Activated Carbon, Manganese-Based Oxide, Layered Double Hydroxide Materials for Supercapacity Applications, prepared under my supervision. In her thesis, promovenda has synthesized excellent nanostructured materials with good textural properties using cheap and environmentally friendly materials, which make them less toxic and suitable for use as potential electrode materials for energy applications. The symmetric and hybrid devices assembled and tested using the synthesized electrode materials exhibited excellent electrochemical performance. Therefore, this research significantly contributes to the scientific community, especially in developing materials with high porosity and good microstructures suitable for energy storage applications. This work has been presented in local and international conferences and produced about 4 publications in SI high impact factor journals. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
I forgot about you, man. I thought that somebody died. Okay. Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Kabir Oyotodun, who has complied with the requirements for the degree of philosophy doctor with a thesis titled Synthesis and Characterization of Carbon-Based Nanostructured Material Electrodes for Designing Novel Hybrid Supercapacitors prepared under my supervision. In his thesis, the promovendas utilized low-cost and environmentally friendly carbon-based materials, which allow for bolstering alliance of characteristics of the similar components in the synergistic combinations, thereby providing enhanced energy and power densities via the combination of effect of battery and supercapacitor materials and storage mechanisms. The fabricated and tested electrode materials displayed excellent electrochemical performance for hybrid supercapacitor application. Hence, the study contributes significant progress in the scientific world, especially in developing nanostructured materials for hybrid energy storage devices. This work has been presented in local international conferences and provided for publication in SI journals. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce you to Zelda Peterser, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Fungal Biodiversity Associated with Selected Azoaceae in the Namakwa National Park and the Succulent Karoo Biome, prepared under my supervision and with Dr. Rihanna Jacobs-Venter as co-supervisor. In a thesis, the promovenda investigated the fungal populations that interact with 10 common species of Azoaceae during the dry season, which is in May, and the flowering season in October, respectively, in the Namakwa National Park. For those of you that have been to the Namakwa Land National Park, you will know these plants as mesums or faithis. Samples were taken from seed, leaf material, and rhizosphere soil. Despite a shift worldwide towards more sustainable living, and the uniqueness and value of the role of fungi have been mostly neglected in conservation efforts. The succulent karoo is an amazing place. It's a biodiversity hotspot situated in the sparsely populated Northern Cape province of South Africa. It is the most diverse arid ecoregion on Earth. About half of the plant species in the region are endemic, and nearly 20% of the taxa are considered threatened. The fungal populations observed in the region were highly diverse and species-rich, positively correlated to the unique plant diversity, and significantly influenced by seasonality. Cosmopolitan fungi were isolated, while rare species from genera such as Neophaeosphaera, Periconia, Prusia, Schizothesium, and Truncatella were only observed in specific conditions. Diversity of the endophytic fungal community associated with the Azoaceae proved to be unmatched by other arid region plants. Communities observed with culture-independent methods differed considerably from cultured fungi, with Oneginales, Ascosphaeriales, and Ketothyreales playing a critical role in the fungal dynamics. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Johannes Hendrik Wiem Porgita, who has compiled with the requirements for the degree Philosophy, Doctor, with a thesis titled Developments Towards the Comprehensive Analysis of Petrochemical Streams, prepared under the supervisor of Professor Ahmed Rover, with Dr. R. Becker as co-supervisor. In his thesis, the promovendus developed chromatographic techniques and investigated the hyphenation of these techniques to comprehensively characterize compounds and compound classes of interest in the petrochemical streams. These developments were aimed at addressing specific analytical techniques in the petrochemical industry. The developed separation in supercritical fluid chromatography separates petrochemical samples into different chemical groups, enabling subsequent characterization by comprehensive two-dimensional gas chromatography. Capillary hydrogenation after comprehensive two-dimensional gas chromatography separation was also developed to separate isomeric, cyclic, and double bond containing compounds. A high temperature comprehensive two-dimensional gas chromatography method was also developed to characterize oxygenates by supersonic molecular beam gas chromatography mass spectrometry. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Samantha Reinecke, who has complied with all the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor, with a thesis titled Towards Improved Chemical and Immunological Strategies for Control of Rhipicephalus Species on Cattle, prepared under my supervision and with Dr. Albie van der Merwe and Dr. Eshka Mizrazi as co-supervisors. In a thesis, the promovenda proposed a novel, multifaceted approach to tick control, which include genetic diversity, acrosite resistance detection, and identification of possible cross-protective vaccines. The study reported on the first population structure in South Africa for 2 economically rhipicephalus tick species. These studies revealed that Rhipicephalus microplus ticks in South Africa group into the same clade as those from American Asia, opening the possibility of cross-protective vaccination using a South African-developed tick vaccine. A pan-transcriptome and reverse vaccinology approach was employed between Rhipicephalus microplus and Declaratus, comparing all 3 life stages with the identification of 19 potential cross-protective vaccine candidates. Stringent selection criteria were used to identify only plasma membrane-associated proteins with predicted overlapping B and T cell epitopes to drive both B cell and T cell dependent immune responses. Lastly, a novel amitrase-resistant mechanism was proposed, which involved pregnenolone sulfate and ionotrophic glutamate receptors to mediate synaptic transmission between neurons in the presence of amitrase. These targets will now be evaluated using next-generation acaricides. This study is the first to employ a pan-transcriptome analysis on important tick species to provide transcriptome data for Rhipicephalus declaratus and to propose a model for resistance for amitrase. Results from this study has been published in 8 international peer-reviewed publications. The promovenda is co-inventor of a patent and has been presented at 2 international conferences. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Miri Retief, who has complied with all the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled A Conceptualization of Impulse Behavior in Experiential Retail in a South African Context, prepared under my supervision and with Professor Dani Petzer from the Gordon Institute of Business Science, UP, as co-supervisor. In a thesis, the Provenda focused on experiential retail as an alternative to traditional brick-and-mortar retail formats in South Africa to explore consumers' impulse behavior in these novel retail contexts. An electronic survey method relying on a retrospective assessment of visitation to fully experiential retail formats was used. The study concludes with a model that depicts patrons' impulse behavior in these contexts and confirms the relevance of impulse behavior, irresistible desires, and impulse participation. Concern regarding the ethical appropriateness of stimulation of impulse purchases and behavior is waived, as no evidence of consumer remorse was detected. Respondents' overall evaluation of experiential retail was undeniably favorable. Findings provide invaluable support to retailers that wish to introduce experiential retail as part of their endeavors to survive in a highly competitive and diverse marketplace. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce you Stephanus Johannes Paulus Retief, who has complied with the requirements of the degree of Philosophy Doctor with the thesis titled Solving the Inverse Radiometric Problems Arising from Intra-Fred Recordings. In his thesis, Solving Inverse Radiometric Problems Arising from Intra-Fred Recordings, the promovers studied the means of obtaining infrared radiation signatures objects of interest in the military, with the specific emphasis of aircraft plans. His research focused on the measurements of the infrared energy content of electromagnetic fields originating from incoherent radiation sources like aircraft plan and extraction of the sought after source radiant energy parameters. The first step was to set the phenomenological model of the measurements made in which the radiant energy is registered by measuring instrument was modeling. This model has to be adequate to the sense that all mechanisms influencing the radiant energy measured by the instrument are taken into account. It means forward modeling of the measurements, such as the influence of the non-ideal measurements, instrument response, and the influence on the environment in which the measurements took place. He then devised methods to solve the radiometric parameters in the phenomenological model, given the rise of the inverse radiometric problems. It means reverse modeling of measurements. This resulted in a method for determining the inner radiant structure of an aircraft plan, which can be used to model the observed plan infrared radiance from the arbitrary observation angle. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree of candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Thabo Thandokuhle Sakolo, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Essays on Reducing Water Demand Management in Southern Africa, investigating hypothetical bias and policy instruments, prepared under the supervision of Dr. Abidoye. In his thesis, the promovender assessed the potential of recycled water and drip irrigation technology as water demand management strategies in the Limpopo River Basin. Through a policy of simulation exercise, he identified policy options that can be used to nudge water users to support water demand management strategies. Demand for both recycled water and drip irrigation technology was estimated using the attribute space to demand estimation, which allows the identification of factors policymakers need to alter to improve the management of water resources. The attribute space approach also allows the selection of a technology that will improve the odds of adoption. The findings show that both recycled water and drip irrigation technology can play a significant role in the management of water resources. For the first time, an inferred valuation technique was applied in a survey choice modeling exercise to elicit households and farmers' preferences for different attributes of recycled water and or drip irrigation technology. The proposed preference elicitation technique was shown to yield significantly different levels of willingness to pay estimates compared to the estimate computed using a traditional choice modeling technique. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Msiwa Ngoni Sakupanya, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophiae Doctor with a thesis titled Metabolomics Approach to Differentiation of Citrus Rootstock Varieties Susceptible to or Tolerant to Phytophthora nicotianae. In his thesis, the promovendus applied advanced metabolomics technology to study the citrus rootstock Phytophthora pathosystem by combining traditional pathogenicity screening of citrus rootstocks in greenhouse experiments with plant metabolomics approaches. A wide range of citrus rootstocks were assessed for their relative tolerance or susceptibility to the root rot pathogen. The rootstocks Australian trifoliate Benton citrange, flying dragon, Swingle citrumello, Terrabella citrumello, and Yuma citrange were confirmed to be tolerant. This information is valuable to the citrus industry in the context of root rot management strategies. Root material from tolerant and susceptible rootstocks was extracted and subjected to untargeted ultra-high performance liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry-based metabolomics. By comparing metabolite profiles of tolerant versus susceptible rootstocks, top markers associated with tolerance were detected. These included 3 iron features putatively identified as Weirone, 4 prenyl oxyresveratrol, and pulverochromanol. Based on these findings, a predictive model for the rapid selection of tolerant citrus rootstocks was developed by employing a logistic regression model. With this model, the time required for the breeding and selection of citrus rootstocks through conventional methods can potentially be drastically reduced. With this work, the promovendus made an important contribution not only to the citrus industry, but also to plant pathology as a science. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Tinotenda Shoko, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Chemical Characterization and Development of Anti-Aging Ingredients from Sclerocaria berea and Ficus sycomorus, prepared under my supervision and with Prof. Zeno Apostolidis and Dr. D. Naidu Maharaj as his co-supervisors. In his thesis, the promovendus study produced the first report of the elastase and collagenase inhibition activities of extracts from Sclerocaria berea and Ficus sycomorus plants, development of chemical profiles of the active extracts from these plants for quality control purposes, and the identification of 3 compounds contributing to collagenase inhibition activities in these 2 plants. This provided an opportunity for the development of anti-aging ingredients from the extracts and pure compounds from the plants. The study culminated in the development of prototypes of an anti-aging day cream and a nourishing night cream for proof of concept studies. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Kennedy Simango, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophiae Doctor, with a thesis entitled Cultivar Choice, Soil Amendment and Correct Rotation Crops Aid in Management of Powdery Scab of Potatoes in South Africa, prepared under my supervision. In his thesis, the promovendus carried out a study on how cultivar choice, soil amendment and the use of correct crop rotations can aid in the management of powdery scab of potatoes in South Africa. This research provides practical solutions that can be used by potato growers in managing the diseases caused by Spongospora subterranea, FSP subterranea. These diseases are regarded as some of the most important challenges affecting potato growers globally. The increase in diseases caused by this pathogen has been attributed to the intense production of potatoes under irrigation, the use of market-preferred susceptible potato cultivars, and the ban of mercury-based seed treatments. The integrated experiments carried out in this research provide advice on the use of third-generation ddPCR in detecting and quantifying Spongospora in the soil, understanding cultivar resistance to Spongospora, the role played by defense-related enzymes in resistance to Spongospora, control of diseases using seed and soil treatments, and the role played by weeds and other field crops as alternative hosts of Spongospora. This knowledge can be used to influence decisions on control and management measures in reducing the impact of these diseases, thereby leading to an increase in productivity and profitability in potato production. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Melissa Simpson, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophiae Doctor, with a thesis titled Mating in Ceratocystis fimbriata, prepared under my supervision and the co-supervision of Mike Wingfield, Martin Coetzee, and Margriet van der Nest. In her thesis, the promovenda investigated the unusual mating system of the plant pathogenic fungus Ceratocystis fimbriata. Most species in Ceratocystis are self-fertile and undergo mating type switching. Different isolates of C. fimbriata, one self-fertile and two self-sterile, presented an opportunity to investigate differences between them. Essentially, this thesis is about sex in fungi, specifically Ceratocystis fimbriata. In addition to the mating type research, an improved genome assembly of C. fimbriata was produced with manually curated genes. This genome sequence allowed genome comparisons to the other members of the Ceratocystidaceae around the mat locus, the locus that controls sexual recombination. Unexpectedly, Ceratocystis species did not show much synteny in this region, and this can be attributed to the high density of transposable elements present in this region. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Hester Maria Steyn, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophiae Doctor with a thesis titled A Taxonomic Revision of the Genus Acanthopsis, prepared under my supervision. In her thesis, the promovenda conducted a comparative morphological study of this poorly known group of spiny flowering plants confined to arid parts of Southern Africa. A new infrageneric classification was proposed, including 20 species, no less than 12 of which were newly described. A number of taxonomically significant characters were identified, some for the first time. Identification keys to species groups and species were provided, as well as diagnostic characters, full descriptions, illustrations, and distribution maps. The conservation status of each species was also updated according to the current knowledge of the distribution pattern and possible threats. A first attempt was made to reconstruct the evolutionary history of the group based on molecular evidence. These studies indicate that Acanthopsis descended from a single recent common ancestor, although the relationships among the species remain unresolved. This work makes a substantial contribution to our knowledge of this previously neglected group of plants. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree, Doctor of Philosophy, with all its associated rights and privileges of the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Connor Seamus Stubby, who has complied with the requirements of the degree of Philosophiae Doctor with a thesis titled Population Genomics, Phylogeography of South African Labiobarbus Species, prepared under the supervision of Professor Paulette Bloomer, with Dr. Karel Oosthuizen and myself as co-supervisors. In his thesis, the promovendus explored the history of 3 South African yellowfish species in KwaZulu-Natal and the Gri Orange River system. These fish are hexaploid, which means that where we have 2 copies of each gene, they inherit 6, and this greatly complicates analysis. The promovendus made advances on several methodological aspects relating to extracting information from these data. One example is in the reconstruction of mitochondrial genomes from next-generation sequence data that would normally be filtered out in analysis because the patterns of variation necessarily conflict with that in the nuclear genome. The promovendus demonstrated that there are 5 distinct populations of KwaZulu-Natal yellowfish and described an intricate history of connections among these populations. He also demonstrated recent divergence between the co-occurring orange-val, smallmouth, and largemouth yellowfish. In both groups, the promovendus demonstrated hybridization both recent and ancient. In several cases, this was facilitated by human habitat modification and water supply connections among river catchments. This project advanced methodologies for working with polyploid organisms and is a significant contribution to the understanding of evolution and conservation management of these emblematic South African fishes. Mr. Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree, Doctor of Philosophy, with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce you to Collins Kimgetuk Tanyui, who has complied with the requirement for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Transcriptome Profiling of Pectobacterium caratovorum subspecies brasiliense reveals genes involved in ecological fitness and virulence mechanisms during infection, prepared under my supervision. In his thesis, the promovenda used the transcriptome profiling approach to identify genes involved in fitness in Pectobacterium during infection of potato tubers at 24 and 72 hours. Genes involved in ecological fitness such as chemotaxis, motility, attachment, ion acquisition, and antibacterial activity were found to be important for the infection process. The promovenda also studied the influence of the ferric uptake regulator, FER, on Pectobacterium pathogenesis. Finally, methyl-accepting proteins were shown to be important for ecological fitness as well as virulence. These findings suggest that fitness and virulence are important for successful pathogenesis in Pectobacteria. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Waldehelu Teklahaimanut, who has complied with the requirement for the degree Philosophia Doctor with a thesis titled Functional Properties of Compatible Blends Between Pre-Gelatinized Maize Starch, Maize and Sorghum Prolamine Proteins, prepared under my supervision and with Professor G.R.N. Taylor and Professor Supakar Sinare as co-supervisors. In his thesis, the promovenda successfully produced a compatible colloidal blend between pre-gelatinized maize starch and prolamine protein, zein, and kafirin under alkaline conditions. The blend showed good forming properties and produced good packaging films. The candidate has shown that alkaline solvent caused deamidation of the prolamine proteins, making them more surface active. The starch also changed to an alkoxide form with negative charges on the surface. These changes of surface activity of both pre-gelatinized maize starch and prolamine proteins, together with sodium ion from the solvent, were proposed to facilitate the compatibility of these biopolymers. This thesis provides more insight into the potential of starch-prolamine protein-compatible blend to produce packaging material and biomaterial as a replacement to petroleum-based plastics. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Mrs. Danielle Twille, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Modulation of Melanoma Metastasis and Angiogenesis by Proclasia saligna and its isolated compound, prepared under my supervision and with Dr. Lenka as co-supervisor. In her thesis, the promovenda studied the potential of a South African plant to inhibit the growth and spread of melanoma cancer. The plant extract as well as a promising isolated compound mixture showed significant inhibitory activity against the melanoma cell as well as regulatory molecules associated with the spread of melanoma through angiogenesis. There are currently no FDA-approved angiogenesis inhibitors available for the treatment of melanoma. Therefore, these findings could advance the research into the discovery of new treatments for targeting the spread of melanoma. Patents have been filed in South Africa, Australia, and the United States. She obtained numerous awards, including an international award, L'Oreal UNESCO for Rising Talents, the Sub-Saharan African Regional Award, the DST Fellowship, GAP Bioscience, and Biotech Fundi Postgraduate Awards. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce you to Joseph van Wijngaard, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophy Doctor with a thesis titled Quantification and Mitigation of Enteric Methane Emissions from Grazing Jersey Cows, prepared under my supervision and with Professor Robin Meeske as co-supervisor. In his thesis, the promovendus studied several groups of lactating Jersey cows grazing either Kikuyu-dominant or ryegrass-dominant pasture. High-producing dairy cows are renowned for the large amount of methane that they release naturally on a daily basis. His research focused on the direct measurement of enteric methane emissions and the mitigation thereof. The customized methane measuring technique used allowed for methane to be continuously sampled from grazing dairy cows without altering animal behavior. Now, the array of 5 studies on different pasture bases provided meaningful results that can be used to update the South African greenhouse gas inventory that is currently based on values from external prediction models. With this foundation in place, he showed that it is possible to reduce methane emissions from grazing dairy cows by up to 40% while improving animal production by supplementing high levels of dairy concentrates. Finally, he showed that the use of dietary nitrate as a feed additive has the potential to reduce methane emissions from grazing dairy cows. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Science in Forest Science. Lisette Duval with distinction. In Environment and Society, Lisa Potrita with distinction. In Environmental Management, Lambertus Kronewald. In Biochemistry, Mariska Nodea. In Chemistry, Brian Bulling with distinction. Frances Sevel. In Zoology, Amanda Adlam. Mark Freeman with distinction. Ndivuo Maligana. Matsawela Ramaklo. Tiniko Shivambu. Martin van Rooyen with distinction. In entomology, Jessica Baden-Oost with distinction. Shamanti Leng. In genetics, Janine Baxter. Catherine Tribe with distinction. Martin Versbicki with distinction. In geography, Nkukisi Kuze. Katleho Mashaine. In geoinformatics, Lisa Mbwia. In engineering geology, Katleho Sehole. In meteorology, Elelwani Paduli. Aritan Nirenda. In plant science, Isabel Boyens with distinction. Stephanie van der Merwe with distinction. In plant pathology, Nadia Grobler. Ntaoleng Maduke. Liesel van der Offen. In applied mathematics, Ziwa Simbarashe. In nutrition, Kumalo Sanele. In food science, Kevin Skinner. Ayanda Kininda. In mathematical statistics, Jacob Modiba. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Agricultural Sciences. In agronomy, Enric Kluter, in Agricultural Economics, Nobukle Mbonane. Elliot Mokotu. In Agricultural Extension, Sekelo Simelane. In Plant Pathology, Christopher Slabert with distinction. In Horticulture, Joseph Sitole. In Animal Science, Animal Breeding and Genetics, Njabulo Dlamini. In Animal Science, Animal Nutrition, Skylar Cummings with this Skylar Cummings. Rika Kotse. Diva Linde. Tercio Nel with distinction. Zankia Swart. In Animal Science, Livestock Production and Ecology, Nomusa Jagka. In Pasture Science, Mziwanda Mangwane with distinction. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Agriculture in Agricultural Economics. Mulalo Randela. In Extension, Masa Ramoratudi. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Agricultural Management. Patrick Unter. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Consumer Science. Endrina Wilken-Jonker. In Interior Merchandise Management, Cheyenne Olliott. In Clothing Management, Prishani Naidu. Margaret Olwok. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Science Honors in Financial Engineering. Alan Riglershoff. In geoinformatics, Kenue Maliehe. In agriculture, crop science, Bukanani Manina. In medicinal plant science, Onkarabile Moketa. In meteorology, Mark Fur. In met.
We are celebrating. Can we please give other candidates an opportunity to pass the stage, and then we'll cheer them all again at the end. We know how excited we all are. Thank you.
In meteorology, Mark Furi. Leseja Lekoloane. Halalelo Lechuiti. Sibongile Mabaso. Le Clohonolo Tobela. In plant science, Kololwetu Tsetiwe. In mathematical statistics, Belinda Lemaire. Tinashe Mazo. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Agriculture Honors in Extension. Adedotun Ayedun. Nkeiru Egbujo. Mr. Vice Chancellor, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Science in Actuarial and Financial Mathematics. Jean-Alexander Franco. Tabang Mabidikama. Nechihanane Mamatuba. Kudakwashe Membere. Jacqueline Mwenda. Siwelile Ngobo. Tristan Roth. In biochemistry, Potiso Mvundlela. Andrea Trihart. In biotechnology, Graham Fort. Ntabiseng Malebie. Mbali Nchali. Kelvin Wright. In chemistry, Jacques Cellier. Tilivali Mashila. Khabo Matlwa. Seshaba Modise. Moeti Moklozana. Rachel Mugumo. Sindile Ntuli. Craig Rees. Mieke van Niekerk. In zoology, Jordine Fouché. Michael Nell. In ecology, Johannes Ndemweda. In genetics, Shannon Lee O'Connor. Megan Saul. In geography, René Groenling. Natasha Kamfer. Famelesibonge Kunene. Mama Clola Mohale. Glenda Nyalungu. Matapelo Ramauma. Charlene van Wyk. In geology, Mita Duplessis. Tsunzuka Nkavele. Nsako Ndlovu. In medical sciences, Tulani Ntombeni. Daniel Swanepoel. In human physiology, Dimolemo Mapeka. Tarin Alisa Naidu. Petunia Ndlovu. Savannah Plaskett. Masejo Po. Cynthia Sitole. In human physiology, genetics, and psychology, Ashley Becker. Kirsten Dingle. Molebohang Mashili. Makobedi Mamabolo. Tiseto Maoka. Tendani Matamela. Nerija Ngundu. Kajal Skunanan. Nicola Vidase. In microbiology, Andani Govola. Klamulo Obiane. Ngobile Langa. Namkla Nkoki. Eren van Skalkwijk. In environmental and engineering geology, Tsoka Piri. Sydney Rangwato. Matthew Rivolta. In environmental sciences, Tato Mashabela. In applied mathematics, Wandile Dube. Tembeka Mabaso. Maria Moselehomo. Yako Strobel. In food science, Riranzu Sambo. In mathematics, Tabang Matsei. In mathematical statistics, Bonolo Molopiane. Jan Rousseau. Blondie Siaga. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Agricultural Science. In Animal Science, Elisna Erasmus. Elia Lepalo. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidate has complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Consumer Science in Clothing Retail Management, Palesa Molloy.
Thank you, Professor Lubuma and the supervisors, as well as everyone here. Let us give our graduates again one big hand of applause for that. Thank you. We have now come to the end of the proceedings, and before we close, I wish to invite all present here for refreshment afterwards. Outside here, then you can take selfies, you can be happy, and do all kinds of things. And of course, you are requested to stand and remain standing when we are singing the national anthem, and you will find the words of the national anthem on the inside cover of your programs. The national anthem, please. May we rise and sing the national anthem. By virtue of the authority entrusted to me, I hereby dissolve this Assembly of the University of Pretoria.